Ladies and gentlemen, what if the closed doors in your life right now aren't failures, but invitations? What if the silence you're hearing isn't absence, but the sound of something greater being built behind the scenes? Before you rush to fix, to force, to find your next move, pause. Because maybe, just maybe, you're not meant to look for work right now. Maybe God is opening doors you haven't even seen yet. When we speak of divine delay, it's easy to confuse it with divine denial. The human heart, wired to measure time in hours, days, and years, grows restless when its longings seem unanswered. We pray, we plan, we push. And when doors remain shut, we often conclude that God has said no. But perhaps He has only said not yet. And that distinction, while subtle, is profoundly important. The idea that delay might serve a higher purpose requires a shift in how we understand time, how we understand God, and most importantly, how we understand ourselves. In our urgency to fulfill needs, to find work, to secure a future, to build a name, we often rush ahead of what God is preparing. We are impatient creatures, quick to confuse absence with neglect, silence with abandonment. But the divine timeline does not operate under the tyranny of the clock. What appears to us as stagnation may actually be divine orchestration. Delay, when viewed from heaven's eyes, is not wasted time, it is the fertile ground in which unseen things grow. Imagine a farmer sowing seeds. For days, perhaps weeks, there is no visible evidence that anything is happening. The soil appears untouched, unchanged. And yet beneath it, roots are forming, stretching quietly through darkness, anchoring themselves for what will eventually break through the surface. The same is true of your life. The season in which you feel overlooked may be the very time God is building in you a resilience that can't be shaken when the door finally opens. We think in terms of results. God thinks in terms of readiness. When no work appears, we panic. When no interviews come, we doubt. But what if the very absence of opportunity is a merciful shield? What if the thing you long for is not being withheld to punish you, but to protect you from wrong timing, from wrong people, from a version of success that would destroy more than it would bless? The job you thought you wanted may not be the one your soul needs. The door you expected to walk through may lead to a room that cannot hold the weight of your calling. And so, God delays. He does not delay as one who is indifferent or distracted. He delays as one who sees the whole path at once. Like a composer who waits before resolving a melody, God allows tension because it deepens the beauty of what's to come. The delay forces us to look inward. It invites us to surrender our compulsive need to manage outcomes and to rediscover what it means to trust not in an idea but in a person. To trust that the one who made you has not forgotten you. That he is not simply aware of your struggle but deeply involved in it, even if invisibly so. There is also something transformative about not receiving what you want when you want it. It strips you of illusion. It confronts your deepest fears, your fear of being forgotten, of being unneeded, of being left behind. And when those fears surface, not to torment but to be healed, you begin to find that delay has done more for your soul than immediate success ever could. You begin to realize that your identity was never meant to be wrapped around your role, your income, or your productivity. You were created to walk with God, not just work for Him. And sometimes He allows your calendar to empty so that your heart can be filled. So much of divine delay is not about the world being unready for you, it's about you being readied for the world. Character, patience, dependence, these are not formed in moments of victory. They are born in the quiet tension of waiting. And while others may speed ahead, while you watch peers rise into positions you crave, remember this: God's delay in your life is not His rejection. It is His redirection, His preparation, His mercy in disguise. And so, when no work comes, do not rush to fix the silence. Sit in it. Listen for the deeper call. Because the door you thought you wanted may never open, and still, you will find one opening that you hadn't imagined. Not because you forced it, but because you waited. And in waiting, you trusted. We often live as though the visible world is the only one that matters. We chase what can be measured: titles, salaries, tasks completed, deadlines met, thinking that our lives find meaning only in what can be touched or tallied. But the visible world, for all its weight and pressure, is not the truest version of reality. It is a shadow, a dim reflection of something deeper, older, and far more permanent. When you are waiting for work, when doors seem closed and silence surrounds you, the temptation is to believe that nothing is happening because nothing can be seen. Yet the unseen world may be more active than you realize, and more important than anything your eyes can track. The nature of spiritual things is that they often work in quiet ways. God rarely announces himself with fanfare. He moves in whispers, in impressions, in strange timings and unexpected turns. While we are busy scanning the horizon for visible opportunities, he is shaping our hearts, forming new desires, untangling hidden fears, and preparing a future that doesn't yet resemble anything we've known. The problem is that we don't often value what we can't see. We have been trained to dismiss it, to fear it, or worse, to ignore it entirely. But the work that God is doing when he says pause or closes a door is often not about your job at all. It is about your vision. When we lose something visible, something tangible like work, we are invited to see differently, to develop a kind of vision that doesn't depend on sight. This is not romantic or abstract thinking, it is spiritual reality. The things that matter most: the growth of the soul, the shaping of character, the development of patience, the increase of faith, happen invisibly. They do not show up on resumes, and they cannot be proved in performance reviews. But they are more real and more lasting than any role you could ever be hired to fill. We mistake visibility for value. We assume that what is public is more meaningful than what is private. We equate being seen with being significant. And yet, some of the most important seasons of a person's life happen far from the spotlight. Think of the roots of a tree. They grow in darkness, underground, without applause or attention. But without them, no fruit would ever appear. In the same way, the spiritual roots of your life are growing right now, quietly, invisibly, and necessarily. And perhaps that's why the job hasn't come. Perhaps that's why no door has opened yet, because there is work being done in places you cannot see. We must also consider the possibility that the job we think we need may only be a surface-level answer to a much deeper question. You may be praying for work, but God may be preparing purpose. You may be seeking income, but he is building influence. The difference between what we want and what God is doing is often measured in what we can't yet perceive. And so we walk forward confused, sometimes hurt, thinking God is distant, when in fact he is nearer than ever, just not in the way we expected. The waiting becomes holy when we begin to see it not as punishment, but as preparation. The unseen world begins to become real to us when we stop measuring progress by external movement. You may not have a job today, but what if this very day was the most important in your spiritual development? What if the loss of structure and schedule is what allows you to hear, perhaps for the first time, the quiet whisper of God's guidance? What if his plans for you do not include simply earning, but building something eternal? We are trained to think that reality is what we can grasp with our senses, but faith teaches us the opposite, that the deepest truths are hidden, not from us but for us. They wait behind the veil of appearances, waiting for us to slow down long enough to notice. The world may judge you by your output. God judges you by your trust, and trust is forged in the places where sight fails. This moment in your life may not look successful. It may not feel productive, but something is happening beneath the surface. You are being refined, clarified, and made ready not for just another job, but for a purpose so rich, so unexpected, that only spiritual eyes will be able to recognize it when it arrives. In many ways, life resembles a stage. We sit in the audience of our own days, watching events unfold with curiosity, sometimes confusion, and often frustration. We see what's before us: the empty inbox, the unanswered applications, the closed doors. And because that is all we can see, we begin to believe it is all that exists. but there is more beyond the curtain. Just as a stage production depends on invisible hands setting lights, adjusting props, and preparing the next scene, so too is the hand of God at work behind what we can observe. His providence moves silently, but it never rests. Just because you cannot see movement does not mean none is taking place. We tend to expect God to act dramatically, publicly, and instantly. We want visible signs of His favor, open doors that swing wide with clear timing and confirmation. But divine orchestration is rarely so theatrical. It is slow, layered, thoughtful, and most often it is hidden. This can be disorienting. When we cannot trace God's hand, we question whether He's involved at all. But invisibility is not the same as inactivity. Like a master playwright, God crafts the narrative of our lives with scenes that only make sense in sequence. He positions characters, prepares settings and times transitions so that when the curtain does finally rise, the story can unfold with meaning. To us, the silence feels like abandonment, but to God it is the sacred stillness necessary to set the next act into motion. What we forget is that providence is not always felt in real time. It often reveals itself in retrospect. We look back and see how every delay was protection, every detour a redirection, every interruption a hidden act of mercy. But in the moment, all we see is the weight. That is where trust is tested, not in the outcome, but in the unseen process leading toward it. The problem is that we like to write our own scripts. We want to know the next scene, plan the dialogue, direct the spotlight. And when life does not go according to the story we had in mind, we are tempted to believe that the entire production has gone off course. But the author of our lives does not co-write. He does not consult us before crafting the plot. And while this may offend our sense of control, it should comfort our hearts because His plans are not limited by our perspective. While we see only one step ahead, He sees the entire arc. He is never improvising. Every part of your waiting, your wandering, even your worrying, fits into a broader work that you are not yet meant to understand. When you feel forgotten, when nothing is happening, it is not because heaven is indifferent. It is because things are being rearranged that you are not yet permitted to see. God often moves in ways that feel like absence only because we have trained ourselves to equate activity with visibility. But the most important work often happens backstage. Before a single actor speaks, there are hours of unseen preparation. Before a single spotlight shines, the wiring must be laid. So it is with you. There is a wiring of purpose being installed where no one sees. A script is being written in heaven that will make sense only when you step into it fully. Until then, your role is not to perform, but to wait. Providence is not rushed. It is deliberate, intricate, patient, and it does not answer to our deadlines. We are often like audience members shouting for the play to begin, unaware that behind the curtain, an entire crew is ensuring that what is to come will be worth watching. What feels like delay is often God's perfection in motion. He is not late. He is aligning things with precision. He is introducing future characters into your story, opening new places, closing others, refining your heart, and waiting for just the right moment to pull the curtain back. So do not despair when doors remain closed. Do not assume you've been passed over. What you perceive as inactivity may in fact be divine activity, quiet, strategic, and faithful. You are not abandoned. You are being prepared. What is happening behind the curtain is more important than you know, and when the time comes, you will see that nothing was wasted, not a single moment of this silent, sacred unfolding. There is a great misunderstanding about rest, particularly in times when nothing visible seems to be happening in our lives. When we are without work, when our schedules lie bare and the phone sits silent, we often feel guilt creeping in. We accuse ourselves of laziness, idleness, or wasting time. We measure our worth by motion. And yet, rest true, soul-deep rest is not laziness when it is born of obedience. In fact, there are seasons where God calls us to stillness, not as punishment or delay, but as a gift of trust and preparation. We are not machines built only to produce. We are beings made for relationship, for dependence, for listening. And there are moments in life when the most faithful thing we can do is stop striving. The idea of rest is not foreign to divine order. In the creation story itself, we are told that God rested not out of fatigue, but as a model. The world was not unfinished because of this rest, it was made whole through it. And yet we, in our fear of falling behind, struggle to believe that rest can be holy. We fear being still because we have built our identity on what we do. When the doing stops, we feel like we are losing ourselves. But it is in the stopping that we find who we really are: souls, not systems. Children, not laborers. People loved not for what we bring, but for who we are. When work is unavailable, when no task claims our energy, we are placed in a posture where rest is no longer optional but necessary. This can feel unnatural. The world prizes hustle. It rewards urgency and constant engagement. To step away from that rhythm can seem irresponsible. And yet it is often in this very refusal to move for movement's sake that we begin to hear what has long been drowned out by noise. In rest we notice things. We notice fear rising up. We notice longing we haven't named. We notice that perhaps we've been running not toward purpose but away from pain. None of these things become clear when we are always occupied. Stillness, though uncomfortable, becomes the mirror. There is also something incredibly powerful about saying no to self-made pressure. When we rest out of obedience, not because we are exhausted, but because we sense that God is telling us to wait, we are making a bold declaration that we trust His timeline more than our own ambition. It is a quiet form of rebellion against the world's demands. It says, I do not belong to the clock. I belong to something greater. That is not laziness. That is alignment. And alignment often requires waiting when every part of us wants to run ahead. Of course, the rest God invites us into is not passive. It is not an invitation to spiritual boredom. It is deeply active in a different way. It calls us to be attentive not to outcomes, but to presence. To spend time in prayer not because we want something, but because we are learning to be someone. To open our hearts and minds to the quiet voice that does not shout above the noise, but waits patiently to be heard beneath it. In this kind of rest, transformation happens. Without force, without striving, without the need to prove anything. This is the rest that restores. We must learn to distinguish between the rest that leads to renewal and the inertia that leads to decay. The former is rooted in trust. The latter is driven by fear. True, obedient rest is never about giving up. It's about giving into a deeper wisdom, a quieter strength, a pace that does not rush simply because the world tells us to. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is not act. Sometimes resting is an act of resistance against everything in us that wants to control the future. When no work appears, when no clear steps seem available, it is not always a signal to push harder. Sometimes it is a divine whisper saying, "Be still. I am doing something you cannot yet see." The kind of rest born of obedience is not a nap from life, it is a reorientation. It brings our hearts back into rhythm with grace. It unhooks our sense of value from what we produce. And it teaches us that God does not need our hustle to accomplish His purposes. He needs our trust. Trust that His stillness is not empty. Trust that even in quiet we are being led. Trust that sometimes to be still is to be exactly where we're meant to be. There is something hidden within disappointment that only reveals itself when all our expected paths fall away. When the doors we were sure would open stay shut. When the plans we labored over dissolve in silence. We find ourselves standing in the strange space between what we wanted and what is. It is in that gap that something unexpected can begin, not a substitute dream, not a consolation prize, but something entirely new, something we would never have seen if the familiar route had unfolded as expected. This is the space where creativity is born. Not the kind of creativity that merely paints or writes or builds, but the deeper kind, the kind that remakes how we see the world and our place in it. When our plans fall apart, it is tempting to believe we've reached an end. We mourn the loss of clarity, the broken rhythm of a path we thought was secure. And yet, There is something liberating in that undoing. We are no longer bound to the trajectory we once clung to. We are no longer required to pretend we have it all figured out. When we are emptied of direction, we are finally open to inspiration. The collapse of the expected often makes room for what we never dared to imagine. God, in His wisdom, often works through disruption to stir something dormant in us. He knows that when we are secure, we become settled. And when we are settled, we stop looking. We stop dreaming differently. But when the ground shifts and the structure we built begins to tremble, we find ourselves turning inward, asking questions we had forgotten how to ask. What else is there? What have I overlooked? What has been buried under routine that now, in the quiet, begins to stir? These are not just questions of career, they are questions of purpose, of calling, of deep inner design. Often it is in the absence of work that the seeds of vocation are planted. There is a difference between a job and a calling. A job pays the bills. A calling ignites the soul. And the journey toward that kind of life, one that is meaningful beyond profit, usually begins in some kind of wilderness. It is rarely chosen. We do not often walk willingly into places of uncertainty. But when they come, we are given a strange kind of opportunity. We are asked to pay attention, not to what we have lost, but to what might be discovered. New ideas rarely come when we are rushing. They do not bloom under pressure. They arrive in spaces of openness, curiosity, even grief. And sometimes what feels like failure is the only doorway wide enough for those ideas to enter. A person who has lost a job may find the freedom to explore passions they never had time to consider. A person turned away from one career path may stumble into one they never knew existed. And what at first felt like the end of something may become the beginning of the truest thing they've ever known. This is not to romanticize hardship. Disappointment is real, and loss of income, status, or structure can be deeply painful. But even in that pain, something can emerge that is richer than we imagined. New skills are discovered. Hidden interests rise to the surface. We begin to see not just what we can do, but who we are becoming. The self that emerges in the absence of routine is often more honest, more open, and more courageous than the one that clung to certainty. We learn that limitation does not equal lack. That in having less we may actually gain more vision, insight, and the permission to try something that doesn't fit neatly into the molds we once believed were required. Sometimes it is only by losing the map that we start to see the landscape. The detour becomes the way. What began as disappointment becomes the spark for invention. And what was once a season of waiting becomes a season of awakening, not by force but by grace. Not through planning but through attention. The imagination, once silenced by the need to perform, starts to breathe again. And from that breath, a new path begins, one you were never meant to find until now. We often imagine faith as something we exercise in moments of crisis or triumph, a plea in desperation, a praise in victory. But true faith lives in the ordinary, in the unremarkable days when nothing seems to be moving. It is forged in the slow hours when heaven is silent and nothing around us hints at progress. This is where belief becomes less about results and more about relationship. It is easy to trust when the answers come swiftly, when the path is clear and the doors open with ease. But what about when all you have is a promise and no sign of its fulfillment? That is when real trust begins, not the kind that is propped up by sight, but the kind that walks forward in darkness, leaning not on answers but on the one who gives them. In this kind of trust, we are asked to relinquish our timelines. That is perhaps one of the most difficult things to surrender. We hold calendars in our heart states by which we think things should happen, seasons when success should have arrived. And when those dates pass unmarked by fulfillment, disappointment creeps in like fog. We question not just the plan, but the planner. Yet what if delay is not denial? What if the waiting is not a void, but a design? We forget that God's pace is not rushed by our anxiety. His timing is not disrupted by our impatience. He is never too slow, he is simply never in a hurry. Walking by faith, then, becomes an act of deep trust in divine timing. It means believing that the things we were promised, peace, provision, purpose, are being prepared even when we cannot see the process. The silence does not mean abandonment. The stillness is not stagnation. We are so accustomed to tying movement to meaning that we struggle to recognize when the deepest work is being done in the unseen. Trust, in this context, is no longer passive. It is active surrender. It is waking up each day and choosing to believe that even in the absence of results, you are still being led. There is a refinement that happens in such seasons. Faith that has never been tested may look strong, but it is brittle. It has not yet learned to hold its shape under pressure. But faith that survives the silence becomes something more than belief. It becomes character. It no longer relies on the rhythm of outcomes, but learns the rhythm of God's heart. You begin to trust not just that He will provide, but that He is good, regardless of what is provided. You begin to seek not just answers, but alignment with His presence. That is a different kind of faith. It is quiet, but unshakable. There is also something deeply human about longing. We are creatures made to hope, to reach, to imagine what could be. But when we tie our hope too tightly to outcomes, we risk distorting the gift of longing. A hope is not meant to be a countdown clock. It is meant to be a companion, something that walks with us through the not yet, keeping our hearts alive when circumstances try to shut them down. To walk by faith is to walk with hope, not because we know when the promise will arrive, but because we know who made the promise. The reliability of the outcome depends not on our effort, but on the character of the one who spoke it. Trust in God's timing also reshapes how we respond to others. We no longer need to compare our pace to theirs. We are freed from the exhausting need to measure our value by someone else's progress. Their path is not our path. Their season is not our season. To truly trust God's timing is to step out of the race and into rest, not the absence of ambition, but the presence of peace. It is learning to celebrate what others receive without feeling like we've been left behind. Because in the economy of grace there is no scarcity. What is meant for you will not pass you by. So the journey becomes one of quiet confidence. Each closed door is no longer a dead end, but a redirection. Each delay is no longer a disappointment, but a reminder that something deeper is being prepared. And every silent moment becomes a sacred space where trust is tested, stretched, and ultimately strengthened. The question is no longer when will the answer come, but will I trust Him while I wait? And in that question, everything changes, not because the circumstances shift, but because you do. So in all these quiet days, closed doors, and uncertain steps, you are not lost, you are being led. What feels like delay is often divine design. What looks like emptiness may be sacred preparation. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. The silence is not a sign of absence, but of something greater being written just beyond your sight. Let this be your assurance. God is not merely watching, He is working. Not always in the places you expect, but always in the ways you need. Do not chase after work in panic. Instead, stand still and trust. Because while you wait, He is opening doors you have not yet seen, building paths you could not have imagined, and preparing you for things greater than what you were reaching for. Rest, listen, believe, and be ready. The stage is being set.